As a retired nurse of 40 years, I know the difference between anxiety and anaphylaxis. I know what it looks like when airways close. I know the specific, terrifying look in a patient's eyes when they realize their own body is turning against them, when the simple act of drawing a breath becomes a war they are losing. I have held the hands of strangers as we fought to keep them on this side of the living. I know the protocols. I know the signs. But my husband, Anthony, he just calls it drama. We live in Beverly Hills, California. Our house is the kind of place tourists slow down to take pictures of. It has manicured hedges that are trimmed twice a week, Italian marble floors that echo when you walk on them, and a driveway filled with cars that cost more than my father made in a lifetime. To the outside world, I am Teresa Stroud, the lucky wife of Anthony Stroud, the successful marketing executive. I have the jewelry, the clothes, and the zip code. But inside these walls, I am just part of the furniture. I am 68 years old, and sometimes I feel like I have spent the last 3 decades holding my breath, waiting for permission to exhale. Anthony is 70 now, but he refuses to accept it. He still dyes his hair that unnatural shade of jet black and wears suits that are cut just a little too tight, trying desperately to cling to the man he was at 40. He runs his marketing firm with an iron fist, demanding absolute loyalty and perfection from his employees. Unfortunately, he treats our marriage the exact same way, as a business arrangement where I am the silent partner. My job is to look good on his arm, smile at the right times, and never, ever cause a scene. For years, I played the part. I was the good wife. I raised our children, I managed the household, and I smoothed over every rough edge Anthony created socially. But there was one thing I could never smooth over, no matter how hard I tried: my biology. I have had a severe, life-threatening allergy to seafood for over 30 years. It isn't an intolerance. It isn't a stomach ache. It is a full-blown, throat-closing, heart-stopping allergy. Even cross-contamination can send me to the emergency room. You would think that having a nurse for a wife would make Anthony more understanding, or at least more cautious. But in the Stroud family, weakness is not tolerated, and they view my allergy as a weakness. That brings us to Sundays. Sundays were the hardest days of my week. Sundays meant dinner at his mother's house. Evelyn Stroud is a woman in her mid-70s who rules her family like a queen on a throne. She is sharp, critical, and entirely lacking in warmth. From the moment Anthony introduced me to her 40 years ago, I knew I wasn't enough. I wasn't rich enough, I wasn't social enough, and I certainly wasn't submissive enough, though I tried my best to learn. But the biggest point of contention was always the food. For 30 years, Evelyn has treated my allergy not as a medical condition, but as a character flaw. She calls it a picky eating habit that I refuse to grow out of. I remember one Christmas, she rolled her eyes when I asked about the stuffing ingredients. "Oh, Teresa," she had said, her diamond bracelets clinking as she poured wine. "You Americans are so sensitive. You act like a little oyster sauce is poison. It's all in your head, dear. You just crave attention." She has never believed me. She thinks I check ingredients to be difficult. She thinks I carry medication to be dramatic. And Anthony, he just wants me to shut up and eat so his mother stays happy. I stood in front of the mirror in the master bath, applying a shade of lipstick that felt like war paint. My stomach was already twisting in knots. It wasn't just the emotional toll of these dinners. It was the physical fear. Every meal at Evelyn's house felt like a game of Russian roulette. I had to interrogate the help. I had to sniff the sauces. I had to poke at the casseroles. It was exhausting to be constantly vigilant in a place that was supposed to be family. I took a deep breath and opened my purse on the granite countertop. I reached into the side pocket. There it was, my EpiPen. The yellow cap, the safety release. I touched the cool plastic just to reassure myself it was real. It is a habit born from decades of nursing. You check your equipment. You prepare for the worst, even when you are praying for the best. I checked the expiration date, even though I had just checked it last week. Good. It was ready. Teresa. Anthony's voice boomed from the hallway. We're going to be late. Mother hates it when we're late. He walked into the bathroom, checking his watch, not looking at me. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't tell me I looked nice. He just looked at my reflection in the mirror to make sure I was presentable, like he was inspecting a car for scratches. I'm ready, I said softly, snapping my purse shut. I wanted to tell him I was anxious. I wanted to say, Anthony, please make sure she doesn't serve fish today. Please stand up for me if she starts making jokes. But I looked at his face and the words died in my throat. He saw me checking the bag. He saw the outline of the EpiPen. He rolled his eyes so hard I thought they would get stuck in his head. It was a look of pure contempt. Teresa, honestly, he sighed, adjusting his silk tie in the mirror next to me. Relax. Stop making everything about you. It's just dinner. Don't be so difficult today. You know how Mom gets when you start obsessing over every little crumb. I'm not obsessing, Anthony, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm staying alive. Drama, he muttered, turning his back on me and walking out the door. Always the drama. Difficult. That was his favorite word for me. If I had an opinion, I was difficult. If I was sick, I was difficult. If I wanted to be treated like a human being, I was difficult. I followed him out to the car in silence. The California sun was shining, the palm trees were swaying in the breeze, and the world looked perfect. But as I climbed into the passenger seat of his pristine Mercedes, I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I looked back at our house as the garage door closed. I didn't know it then, but that would be the last time I left that house as the woman I used to be. I clutched my purse tighter against my lap, feeling the hard plastic of the EpiPen through the leather. I had a bad feeling about tonight. And in 40 years of working in the ER, my gut instinct had never been wrong. The drive to Evelyn's estate usually took 20 minutes, but that Sunday, it felt like seconds. Before I was ready, we were pulling up the long paved driveway lined with imported Italian cypress trees. The house loomed ahead, a massive stucco mansion that looked more like a museum than a home. It was beautiful, undeniably, but to me, it always felt like a fortress I was trying to infiltrate. Anthony parked the car and didn't wait for me. He was already out the door, adjusting his jacket, eager to be the dutiful son. I took a moment, checking my reflection in the visor mirror one last time. I looked fine. I looked normal. I didn't look like a woman who was terrified of eating dinner. I grabbed my purse, feeling the reassuring weight of the EpiPen inside, and followed him. The heavy oak door swung open before we even knocked. Evelyn was standing there, framed by the light of the crystal chandelier in the foyer. She was wearing a cream-colored silk blouse and perfectly tailored trousers. Her silver hair coiffed into a stiff, immovable helmet. "Anthony!" she cried out, her face lighting up with genuine adoration. She pulled my husband into a hug that lasted just a few seconds too long. Then she turned her gaze to me. The light in her eyes vanished instantly, replaced by a cool, critical assessment. "Hello, Teresa," she said, her voice dropping an octave. She leaned in for a polite, air kiss near my cheek, never actually touching my skin. She pulled back and tilted her head, frowning slightly. "Oh, dear. You look tired. Are you feeling all right? Your skin looks so papery. I hope you aren't coming down with something. We can't have you getting the rest of us sick." "I feel fine, Evelyn," I said, forcing a smile. "You have a lovely home, as always." "Well, some of us make an effort," she said, smoothing her blouse. Come in. The others are already seated. We didn't want the food to get cold waiting on you. We weren't late. We were actually 5 minutes early. But in Evelyn's world, if you weren't there when she thought you should be, you were late. We walked into the dining room. It was a grand space with high ceilings and a mahogany table long enough to seat 20 people. Tonight, it was set for 6. Anthony's younger brother, Sam, and his wife, Caroline, were already there nursing glasses of white wine. They gave me tight, sympathetic smiles. They knew the drill. Keep your head down, agree with Evelyn, and go home as soon as possible. I took my seat. Anthony sat to my right, but he immediately turned his chair slightly away from me to talk to his mother. I was isolated on the corner. The table was set flawlessly. Heavy silver cutlery, linen napkins folded into swans, and crystal water goblets. There was no menu, which always made my heart race. I decided to keep things simple tonight. Evelyn announced, taking her seat at the head of the table. She rang a small silver bell, and the kitchen staff emerged. Since Teresa is always so particular about her diet, I wanted to make sure everyone was comfortable. She said particular, the same way one might say contagious. The servers placed a shallow, wide-rimmed bowl in front of each of us. I looked down. It was a thick, creamy white soup, garnished with fresh chives and a drizzle of olive oil. Rustic potato and leek soup, Evelyn declared. It's a new recipe I found. Very hearty, very comforting. My nurse's brain immediately started scanning. Potato and leek, usually safe. Base ingredients, potatoes, leeks, cream, butter, stock. The stock was the danger zone. In high-end cooking, chefs often used chicken stock, which was fine. But sometimes to add depth or umami, people used fish sauce, anchovy paste, or shellfish stock. I stared at the bowl. It was opaque. I couldn't see what was in the liquid. I picked up my spoon, but didn't dip it in. I looked at Evelyn. She was watching me, not watching Anthony eat, not watching Sam. She was watching me. Evelyn, I said, keeping my voice light and casual. This looks delicious. But I have to ask, what kind of stock did you use? You didn't use any shellfish base or fish sauce for flavor, did you? The table went quiet. Sam stopped chewing his bread. Caroline looked down at her lap. Evelyn sighed, a long, loud exhalation of suffering. She looked at Anthony. You see, I spend all day in the kitchen, and this is the thanks I get. An interrogation. I'm not interrogating you, I said, my hand tightening on the spoon. I'm asking a medical question. Did you put seafood in this? Evelyn smiled, then a sweet, saccharine smile that didn't reach her eyes. Of course not, dear. I know how sensitive you are. It is completely vegetarian. Vegetable stock, potatoes, leeks, and cream. I made it specifically with you in mind because I didn't want to hear any complaints tonight. I looked at her. I wanted to believe her, but something in my gut was twisting. Are you sure? I asked. Sometimes store-bought vegetable stocks can be processed in facilities that handle shrimp or... Teresa, enough! Anthony snapped. I jumped slightly. Anthony had turned on me. His face flushed with irritation. Mom just told you she made it for you. He hissed. She went out of her way to make a vegetarian soup. Can't you just say thank you and eat? You're embarrassing me. You do this every single time. It's potatoes. Just eat the damn potatoes. I'm just being careful, Anthony, I whispered. You're being paranoid, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Mom went to a lot of trouble. Don't be rude. I looked around the table. Sam and Caroline were busy eating, keeping their heads down to avoid the crossfire. Evelyn was cutting a piece of bread, looking pleased with herself. Anthony was glaring at me with pure annoyance. I felt small. I felt like the crazy, high-maintenance wife everyone tolerated, but nobody liked. If I pushed this further, if I refused to eat, I would be ruining the dinner. I would be the villain. Evelyn looked me right in the eyes. It's just vegetables, Teresa. I promise. You won't even taste a difference. You won't even taste a difference. That was an odd phrasing, but Anthony was staring at me, waiting. I was a nurse. I knew the protocols. When in doubt, throw it out. But I was also a wife who had been beaten down by 30 years of emotional conditioning. I wanted the tension to stop. I wanted Anthony to stop looking at me with hate. I trusted my husband. I had to trust that he wouldn't let his mother hurt me. Okay, I said quietly. Thank you, Evelyn. I appreciate it. I dipped my spoon into the thick, white soup. I lifted it to my lips. It smelled mostly of cream and chives. I took a full spoonful into my mouth and swallowed. It was rich and salty, very salty, but as the warmth slid down my throat, I told myself to relax. It was just soup. It was safe. Evelyn said it was safe. Anthony nodded, satisfied that I had obeyed, and went back to his conversation. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart, and reached for my water glass. I didn't know it yet, but the clock had already started ticking. It didn't take 10 minutes. It didn't even take 2. The reaction was almost instantaneous, a violent rejection that started the moment the liquid hit the back of my throat. As a nurse, I have taught patients about the sense of impending doom. In textbooks, it sounds dramatic, like a line from a bad movie. In reality, it is a primal chemical signal from your brain that screams, "You are in danger." I felt it first on my tongue. It wasn't a taste, it was a sensation. A metallic tang, like I was sucking on a penny, followed immediately by a fierce, prickly heat. It felt like 1,000 tiny needles were dancing across my lips. I dropped my spoon. It clattered loudly against the china bowl, the sound echoing in the silent dining room. My hand flew to my neck. The skin was already hot. Inside, my throat wasn't just tight. It felt like someone had poured concrete down my esophagus, and it was hardening instantly. The soft tissue at the back of my mouth began to swell, blocking the air. I tried to inhale. It sounded like a whistle. Wheeze. "Teresa?" Sam asked, looking up from his soup. "You okay?" I couldn't answer. I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself because the room had started to spin. I pointed at my throat, my eyes wide, pleading with my husband to see me. To really see me. Anthony looked up, annoyed. He hadn't even noticed the wheezing. "Teresa, sit down. You're making a scene." But Evelyn started laughing. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was a dark, satisfied chuckle. She picked up her wine glass, looking at me with a smirk that chilled my blood even as my body burned. "Oh, look at her, Anthony," Evelyn said, gesturing toward me with her glass. I told you it was all in her head." I stared at her, gasping for air, my hands clawing at my collar. "See," Evelyn continued, addressing the table calmly, as if discussing the weather. "I put a splash of shrimp broth in the stock for flavor. Just a splash. You can't even taste it. But look at her. She takes one bite and starts acting like she's dying instantly. It's psychosomatic. She knew I was cooking, so she decided to stage a performance. The words hit me harder than the lack of oxygen. She did it on purpose. She hadn't made a mistake. She hadn't been careless. She had intentionally put the one thing that could kill me into my food to prove a point. She was testing me. She was gambling with my life to win an argument about my drama. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tell her that this wasn't a performance, that my blood pressure was crashing, that my immune system was currently flooding my body with histamines that were shutting down my organs. But I couldn't speak. My tongue felt too big for my mouth. Mom, did you really put shrimp in there? Sam asked, his voice trembling. Oh, stop it, Sam. It's barely a teaspoon, Evelyn scoffed. Teresa, sit down and stop clutching your pearls. It's embarrassing. I looked at Anthony. He was the only one who could stop this. He was my husband. He knew I carried medication. He knew the times we had been to the ER before. Anthony looked at his mother, then at me. He saw my face turning red, the veins in my neck bulging. And he sighed. Teresa, he said, his voice dripping with exhaustion. If you're going to act like this, maybe you should just wait in the car. Mom is trying to have a nice dinner. He didn't believe me either. He thought I was faking it. He thought I was holding my breath to spite his mother. That was the moment the fear turned into clarity. I was alone. If I waited for them to help me, I would die right here on this Persian rug, and Evelyn would probably complain that I stained the carpet. My vision was starting to blur at the edges, a dark vignette closing in. I had seconds, not minutes. My hands were shaking violently as I grabbed my purse from the floor. My fingers felt like sausages, swollen and clumsy. I fumbled with the clasp. Open. Please, God, open. What is she doing now? Evelyn asked, sounding bored. I ripped the bag open, dumping the contents onto the pristine table. Lipstick, keys, wallet, and the EpiPen. I grabbed the plastic tube. It felt slippery in my sweating hands. Teresa, put that away. Anthony barked, half standing. Don't you dare inject that thing at the dinner table. You are not having a reaction. You are having a tantrum. I didn't listen. I couldn't listen. The air was a thin straw now. I popped the blue safety cap off the back. I gripped the device in my fist, just like I had practiced 100 times in training. Blue to the sky, orange to the thigh. I didn't bother to pull up my dress. The needle was designed to go through clothing. I swung my arm back and jammed the orange tip hard against my outer thigh. Click. The sound was sharp and loud in the quiet room. I held it there. 1, 2, 3. I felt the spring release. I felt the needle punch through the fabric and into my muscle. I felt the burn of the epinephrine flooding my system, pure synthetic adrenaline designed to kickstart a failing heart and force open closing airways. I slumped against the table, keeping the pen pressed against my leg, counting the seconds while the room went dead silent. Sam and Caroline were staring at me with their mouths open. Evelyn looked affronted, as if I had just thrown a drink in her face. And Anthony just looked angry that I had defied him. I pulled the pen out. The needle was exposed now, gleaming under the chandelier light. I dropped it onto the table next to the bread basket. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. Boom, boom, boom. A side effect of the medicine, but also a sign that I was still alive. I took a ragged, gasping breath. The air rushed in. It rasped against my swollen throat, but it went in. I looked up at them, tears of physiological shock streaming down my face. I wasn't dead, but the marriage was. The first thing you feel when you inject epinephrine is not relief. It is violence. It is a chemical assault on your own system. Within seconds of the needle leaving my thigh, my heart wasn't just beating, it was vibrating. It felt like a bird trapped in a cage, slamming against my ribs at 140 beats per minute. My hands, which had been fumbling moments before, were now shaking with a tremor so severe I could barely unclench my fist from the plastic tube. But the air, the beautiful, sweet air, was forcing its way back into my lungs. The swelling in my throat didn't vanish, but the vice grip loosened just enough for me to take a jagged, noisy breath. I slumped back in my chair, sweat instantly breaking out across my forehead. My body was in full fight or flight mode, flooded with synthetic adrenaline. I felt nauseous, dizzy, and terrifyingly alert. The room was silent. I looked up, gasping, wiping the cold sweat from my upper lip. "Call 911, I rasped. My voice sounded broken, like gravel grinding together, but the words were clear. "Call them. Now." I waited for the movement. I waited for Sam to pull out his phone, or for Anthony to jump up and run to the landline in the kitchen. I waited for the basic human instinct to help someone in distress to kick in. No one moved. Anthony looked at the empty EpiPen on the table. Then he looked at his mother. Evelyn was pressing a linen napkin to her lips, her eyes wide with what looked like annoyance rather than concern. Then Anthony looked at me. His face wasn't etched with worry. It was tight with irritation. He looked like a man whose favorite TV show had been interrupted by a test of the emergency broadcast system. "Teresa, stop it," Anthony said, his voice low and firm. "You used the pen. I saw you. You're breathing again. You're fine." "I am not fine," I wheezed, grabbing the edge of the table to keep myself upright. The room was tilting to the left. "The medication, it wears off. 15 minutes. I need a hospital. Rebound reaction." I tried to use my nurse voice, the authoritative tone I had used with thousands of patients, but it came out weak and trembling. Every nurse knows this. An EpiPen is not a cure. It is a bandage. It buys you time to get to the emergency room before the anaphylaxis comes back, often harder than the first time. It is called a biphasic reaction. If I didn't get steroids and observation immediately, my throat could close up again in 20 minutes, and this time I wouldn't have a second pen. "I need to go," I said, trying to stand up. My knees buckled, and I had to catch myself on the chair. "Anthony, please." Anthony didn't stand up to help me. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "We are not calling an ambulance to my mother's house, Teresa," he said, enunciating every word slowly. "Do you have any idea what time it is? The sirens, the lights, the neighbors will be out on their lawns in seconds. It will be a spectacle. I am not having the paramedics stomping through Mom's foyer, because you can't handle a little seasoning." I stared at him. The adrenaline was pounding in my ears, whoosh, 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 but his words cut through the noise like a knife. The neighbors. He was worried about the neighbors. He was worried about the property value. He was worried about the gossip. He was worried about everything except the fact that his wife was dying in front of a bowl of potato soup. "I could die," I whispered. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. "Oh, please," Evelyn interjected, waving her hand dismissively. "You're talking, aren't you? If you can talk, you can breathe. Stop trying to ruin the evening. Just because you were wrong about the soup. You're just embarrassed because you made a scene." I looked at Sam and Caroline. Sam looked sick, his face pale, but he didn't say a word. He was terrified of his mother. He wouldn't help me. I looked back at Anthony. I searched his eyes for any trace of the man I had married 40 years ago. I looked for the man who had held my hand when our children were born. I looked for the man who had sworn to love me in sickness and in health. He wasn't there. The man sitting across from me was a stranger who viewed my life as an inconvenience to his social standing. If I stayed here, waiting for him to grow a conscience, I would be dead within the hour. The realization hit me harder than the adrenaline. I am on my own. I didn't argue anymore. I didn't beg. You don't beg the executioner for mercy. You just try to escape the guillotine. I reached out with a shaking hand and grabbed my car keys from the pile of things I had dumped on the table. I grabbed my phone. I left the lipstick. I left the wallet. I didn't care. "Where are you going?" Anthony asked, his brow furrowing. "Sit down. Eat some bread. Drink some water. You'll settle down in a minute." I ignored him. I pushed myself away from the table, using every ounce of strength I had left. My legs felt like rubber, wobbling under my weight. The room swam. The chandelier dragged into a streak of light, but I focused on the front door. One step. Another step. Teresa? Anthony barked. If you walk out that door, don't expect me to come chasing after you. I am not playing this game. I didn't turn back. I couldn't. If I turned back, I might scream or I might collapse, and neither would save me. I stumbled into the foyer, my hand sliding along the wall for support. The heavy oak door was heavy, so heavy. I threw my weight against it and stumbled out into the cool night air. The silence outside was jarring compared to the chaos inside my body. The crickets were chirping. The air smelled of jasmine. It was a beautiful night to die. No, I told myself, not tonight. I made it to the Mercedes. I fumbled with the fob, dropping the keys once before managing to unlock the door. I fell into the driver's seat. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely get the key in the ignition. Start the car. Teresa, just start the car. The engine roared to life. I put it in reverse and backed out, nearly clipping one of the Italian cypress trees. I didn't care. I slammed the car into drive and sped down the long driveway. The nearest hospital, Cedars-Sinai, was usually 15 minutes away. On a Sunday night, with light traffic, maybe 10. But 10 minutes is a lifetime when your body is fighting a war. The drive was a blur of terror. The streetlights smeared into long, yellow lines. My heart was skipping beats now, fluttering in my chest like a trapped moth. The nausea rolled over me in waves. I rolled down the window, letting the wind blast into my face, trying to keep myself conscious. Focus, I commanded myself. Stay in the lane. Red light. Stop. Green light. Go. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced at it. A text from Anthony. You are being ridiculous. Come back inside. I didn't touch it. I could feel the throat tightness returning. The rebound was starting. The initial dose of epinephrine was wearing off, metabolized by my racing heart. My breathing was getting ragged again. That high-pitched was returning to haunt me. Just get there. Just get there. I ran a yellow light that had definitely turned red. I didn't care. I saw the blue H sign for the hospital. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I pulled into the emergency room bay, swerving slightly, and slammed the car into park right in front of the sliding glass doors. I didn't bother to park in a spot. I didn't bother to turn off the engine. I kicked the door open and fell out of the car. A security guard looked up, startled. He saw me, a 68-year-old woman in a designer dress, stumbling, clutching her throat, face swollen and red. Help! I croaked. It was barely a whisper. But he saw. He knew. We got a code blue at the entrance, he shouted into his radio, running toward me. 2 nurses came rushing out with a wheelchair. I didn't know them. They were strangers. But as they grabbed my arms and lowered me into the chair, looking at me with urgency and focus, I felt safer with them than I had felt in my own home for 30 years. What happened, honey? One of the nurses asked, checking my pulse. Allergic reaction? Shrimp. I gasped, the darkness closing in on the edges of my vision. EpiPen, 20 minutes ago. Okay, we got you, she said, running with the chair toward the trauma bay. You're safe now. We got you. As the double doors swung open and the bright fluorescent lights of the ER washed over me, I let go. I stopped fighting to stay upright. I stopped fighting for Anthony's approval. I was alone. My husband was back at the dinner table, probably apologizing to his mother for my rudeness. But as the 4-needle pricked my arm and the cool rush of antihistamines hit my blood, I realized something profound. I was alone, yes, but I was alive. And for the first time in a long time, those 2 things felt like a victory. The sound of an emergency room is something you never forget, especially when you've spent 40 years working in one. It's a specific kind of white noise, the rhythmic beep, beep, beep of cardiac monitors, the squeak of rubber shoes on linoleum, the distant murmur of voices speaking in urgent codes. For decades, that sound meant I was at work. It meant I was the one in control, the one holding the clipboard, the one saving lives. But tonight, the sound meant I was the patient. I was lying in a narrow hospital bed, shivering under a thin, scratchy blanket. My expensive dinner dress had been replaced by a humiliating, open-back gown with a pattern of faded blue geometric shapes. And 4-line was taped to the back of my left hand, pumping a cocktail of high-dose steroids and antihistamines directly into my bloodstream to stop my body from attacking itself. My throat still felt raw, like I had swallowed broken glass, but the terrifying tightness was gone. I could breathe. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs completely, savoring the simple, mechanical act of oxygen entering my body. A young doctor, probably in his early 30s, pulled back the curtain. He looked exhausted but kind. He checked the monitor above my head and then looked at his chart. "Mrs. Stroud," he asked, "how is the throat feeling?" "Better," I croaked. My voice sounded raspy, unrecognizable. "Still sore." "That's to be expected," he said, scribbling something down. "I want to keep you for a few more hours for observation. That was a severe reaction. We need to make sure you don't rebound again now that the epinephrine is wearing off." He paused and looked me right in the eye. His expression shifted from professional to serious. "I have to tell you, Mrs. Stroud, you are very lucky you came in when you did. Your airway was significantly compromised. Another 10 or 15 minutes without the 4 steroids, and we might be having a very different conversation. You cut it close. You cut it close." I nodded slowly. I knew. I was a nurse. I knew exactly how close the margin was between uncomfortable and dead. "Is there anyone we can call for you?" the doctor asked gently. "A husband? A family member to come pick you up?" The question hung in the air like a lead weight. "No," I whispered, staring at the ceiling tiles. "I'm fine. I drove myself." The doctor looked at me for a beat too long, sensing the story there, but he didn't press. "Okay, rest. I'll check on you in an hour." He let the curtain fall back into place, leaving me alone in the small, semi-private cubicle. I turned my head and looked at the plastic side table where the nurse had placed my belongings. My purse, my keys, and my phone. My phone. I hadn't looked at it since I stumbled out of the car. A part of me, a foolish, hopeful part of me that had survived 40 years of neglect, thought that maybe, just maybe, Anthony had come to his senses. Maybe he had seen me drive away and realized he had gone too far. Maybe he was in the waiting room right now, pacing, terrified that he had lost his wife. I reached out with my free hand, fighting the tangle of 4 wires, and grabbed the phone. The screen lit up. There was one notification, a text message from Anthony. It wasn't a missed call. It wasn't a "where are you?" It wasn't a "is everything okay?" The text read, "Are you done pouting? We're having coffee. Don't be too late coming back. Mom wants to clear the table." I stared at the words. I read them once. I read them twice. I read them a third time, trying to make them make sense in a world where logic existed. "Are you done pouting?" He thought I was pouting. He thought I was driving around the block to cool off. He was sitting at his mother's dining table, drinking espresso and eating dessert, while nurses were sticking needles in my veins to keep my throat open. He hadn't followed me. He hadn't even checked the driveway to see if my car was gone. A coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the hospital air conditioning. It started in my stomach and radiated out to my fingertips, freezing the blood in my veins. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't heartbreak. I had spent years being heartbroken. Heartbreak is hot. It's messy. It involves tears and pleading. This was different. This was ice. This was the absolute, final death of any love I had ever held for that man. For 40 years, I had made excuses for him. He's just stressed. He's just protecting his mother. He doesn't mean to be dismissive. That's just how men of his generation are. I had gaslit myself into believing that I was the problem, that I was too sensitive, too demanding, too difficult. But lying there in that sterile bed, the fog lifted. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a bad marriage. This was abuse. Evelyn hadn't made a mistake with the soup. She had intentionally put a dangerous allergen into my food to test me. That is not a prank. That is battery. That is poisoning. And Anthony had watched his wife, the woman who had borne his children, ironed his shirts, and nursed him through the flu, inject herself with emergency medication and beg for an ambulance. And he had said no because he was worried about the neighbors. He had left me to die to save his social standing. If a stranger on the street had done that to me, I would have called the police. I would have pressed charges. I would have fought back. So why was I accepting it? Because the man holding the weapon was wearing a wedding ring. I didn't cry. I think I had cried my last tear for Anthony Stroud somewhere on the drive over. I sat up in the bed, ignoring the dizziness. I looked at the 4-line in my hand. It was my lifeline, but it was also a tether. I needed to get out of here. I wasn't going back to that house to beg for forgiveness. I wasn't going back to explain myself. I was going back to burn it down. Not the house. I wasn't a criminal, but the life, the facade, the lie that we were a happy, functioning couple. I tapped the screen of my phone and deleted Anthony's text without replying. I didn't want him to know where I was. I didn't want him to know I was safe. Let him sit there with his coffee. Let him wonder why I wasn't coming back to clear the table. For the first time in my life, his comfort was not my priority. My survival was. I pressed the call button for the nurse. When she poked her head in, looking concerned, I spoke with a voice that was raspy but steady. "When can I be discharged?" I asked. "Doctor wants to keep you a bit longer." "Honey," she said. "I know," I said, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. "But I need to go home. I have things to do." "You need to rest, Mrs. Stroud. You've had a shock." "I've had a wake-up call." I corrected her. "And I have a lot of packing to do." I wasn't going back to be a wife. I was going back to be a woman who was finally, after 68 years, putting herself first. The Anthony I knew was dead to me. The man waiting at that table was just an obstacle I had to remove from my life. And I knew exactly how I was going to do it. The sun was coming up as I turned onto our street. It was a beautiful California morning, the kind that usually made me feel lucky to live here. The sky was a perfect, cloudless blue, and the sprinklers were hissing rhythmically on the neighbors' lawns. But as I pulled my car into the driveway of the house I had lived in for 30 years, I didn't feel lucky. I felt like a stranger visiting a museum. I turned off the ignition and sat there for a moment. My hands were still gripping the steering wheel. I looked down at my wrist. The plastic hospital bracelet was still there, tight against my skin. It had my name, my date of birth, and the word allergy printed in bold, red letters. I hadn't cut it off. I wanted to wear it. I wanted him to see it. It was my proof of life. It was the only thing in this zip code that was telling the truth. I got out of the car. My body felt heavy, exhausted from the steroids and the sleepless night in the observation unit, but my mind was crystal clear. It was a strange sensation. For decades, my mind had been a fog of anxiety, worrying about Anthony's moods, worrying about his mother's criticism, worrying about keeping the peace. Now, the anxiety was gone. It had been burned away by the adrenaline of the night before. I unlocked the front door. The house was silent. It smelled of lemon polish and stale coffee. I walked down the hallway toward the kitchen. I could hear the rustle of paper. Anthony, he was sitting at the breakfast nook, just like he did every single morning. He was wearing his silk robe, reading the Wall Street Journal, and sipping an espresso. The scene was so normal, so mundane, that it made my stomach turn. How could he just sit there? How could he butter his toast when he didn't know if his wife was alive or dead? He heard my footsteps and lowered the paper. He didn't jump up. He didn't run to me. He didn't look relieved. He looked impatient. Finally home, he asked, glancing at the clock on the microwave. "You've been gone all night, Teresa. I assume you stayed at a hotel to make a point." I stopped in the doorway. I looked at him. I really looked at him. I saw the lines around his mouth, the arrogance in his posture, the complete and total lack of empathy in his eyes. He didn't see a survivor standing in his kitchen. He saw an inconvenience. "Well," he pressed, taking a sip of his coffee, "I hope you're ready to call Mom and apologize. She was very upset last night. You ruined her dinner party with that little stunt. She thinks you owe her a written apology for the drama. A written apology for almost dying. In the past, the old Teresa would have started crying. She would have tried to explain. She would have shown him the hives on her neck or the bruise on her thigh from the needle. She would have begged him to believe her. But the old Teresa died in the ER waiting room. I didn't say a word. I didn't even blink. I just looked at him with a dead, flat stare. It was the kind of look you give to a patient who is shouting at you. You don't engage. You just document the behavior and move on. I walked right past him. "Teresa," he called out, his voice rising. "I am talking to you. Don't you walk away from me." I kept walking. I walked out of the kitchen, down the hall, and into the master bedroom. I closed the door behind me, but I didn't lock it. I didn't need to. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. You can't be afraid of someone you don't respect. I walked into the walk-in closet. It was filled with clothes Anthony liked. The sequined gowns for his charity galas, the uncomfortable heels he insisted I wear because they made my legs look longer, the stiff blazers that made me look like a proper executive's wife. I reached up to the top shelf and pulled down my suitcase. It was a dusty, gray carry-on. I hadn't used it in years because Anthony always insisted we take his matching leather luggage whenever we traveled. I unzipped it on the bed. I started packing, but I didn't pack the gowns. I didn't pack the heels. I went to the back of the drawer and found my comfortable jeans. I found the soft cotton t-shirts I used to wear when he wasn't home. I packed my walking shoes. I went to the bathroom and grabbed my toiletries, my blood pressure medication, and my spare glasses. As I moved around the room, I caught sight of the photos on the wall. There was our wedding photo from 40 years ago. I looked so young, so hopeful. I was smiling up at him with total adoration. I remembered that girl. She thought she had won the lottery. She thought she was marrying a prince. She didn't know she was signing a contract to be a silent servant. There were photos of our children, now grown and living in other states. They rarely visited. For years, I thought they were just busy. Now, standing in the silence of this house, I realized they probably just didn't want to be around him. They didn't want to be around the criticism, the tension, the need for everything to be perfect. I had stayed to protect them, to keep the family together. But they had left long ago. I was the only one still serving a sentence. I looked at a photo taken just last year at a Christmas party. Anthony was holding court in the center, laughing, a glass of scotch in his hand. I was in the background, holding a tray of appetizers, looking tired. That was my life. The background character, the staff. I took the photo off the wall. I looked at it for a second, Then I dropped it into the trash can by the vanity. The glass shattered. It was a satisfying sound. I felt a surge of something hot and powerful in my chest. It wasn't anger. It was better than anger. It was power. For decades, I had told myself I couldn't leave. I'm too old. I told myself. Where would I go? Who would want me? I've been a housewife for 40 years. I can't make it on my own. But as I zipped up that suitcase, I realized those were lies. I was 68, not dead. I had been a nurse. I had saved lives. I had raised children. I had managed a household budget of thousands of dollars. I was capable. I was strong. And I had just survived a murder attempt by my mother-in-law. If I could survive that, I could survive being single. I wasn't leaving because I was weak. I was leaving because I was finally strong enough to realize I deserved better. I put on a clean sweater and a pair of comfortable pants. I brushed my hair, looking at the gray strands in the mirror. I didn't dye them to please him anymore. This was me. This was who I was. I grabbed the handle of the suitcase. It was light. It contained only the things that were mine, truly mine. I walked to the bedroom door and opened it. I could hear Anthony in the kitchen aggressively rattling the newspaper, waiting for me to come back and grovel. He was waiting for the wife who would apologize for being poisoned. He was going to be waiting a long time. I took a deep breath, clutching the handle of the suitcase. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It was beating slow and steady. I was done being the silent nurse. It was time to make some noise. The sound of suitcase wheels rolling over marble floors is distinct. It is a hollow, rhythmic clicking sound that echoes. Click-clack, click-clack. That sound was the only thing breaking the silence of the house as I walked down the long hallway toward the kitchen. I gripped the handle of my gray carry-on tight. My knuckles were white, but my hands were steady. For the first time in decades, I wasn't walking into a room wondering what mood Anthony was in. I wasn't wondering if I had done something to upset him. I simply didn't care. I rounded the corner into the expansive, sun-drenched kitchen. Anthony was exactly where I had left him moments ago. He was seated at the head of the island, a pristine white napkin tucked into his collar, slicing into a piece of papaya. He looked the picture of a relaxed, wealthy man on a Sunday morning. He heard the wheels stop. He paused, his fork halfway to his mouth, and looked over the top of his reading glasses. His eyes traveled from my face down to the suitcase standing next to me. He didn't look worried. He didn't look shocked. He smiled, a small, patronizing smirk that I had seen 1,000 times before. It was the smile he used when he thought I was being silly. Going somewhere? He asked, popping a piece of fruit into his mouth. He chewed slowly, looking amused. What is this? A spa weekend? Did you decide to go cool off at the Four Seasons because you're still mad about dinner? He chuckled, shaking his head as he turned back to his newspaper. Honestly, Teresa, you really commit to the bit, don't you? Just make sure you're back by Tuesday. We have the charity gala, and I need you to pick up my tuxedo. The arrogance took my breath away for a split second. He truly believed that I was incapable of leaving him. He thought my life revolved so tightly around his schedule, his galas, his dry cleaning, his mother, that the idea of me walking out the door permanently didn't even register as a possibility. I let go of the suitcase handle. It stood upright, a gray sentinel between us. I walked over to the island. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded stack of papers I had been given upon discharge. The bright white pages were stapled together. I didn't hand them to him. I slammed them down on the granite counter right on top of his open newspaper. The sound was sharp, like a gunshot. Anthony flinched. He looked at the papers, then up at me, his face hardening. What is this? He snapped, pushing the papers aside to see his article. Don't throw things at me, Teresa. Read it, I said. My voice was low. It didn't tremble. I am not reading your diary. He scoffed. It is not a diary, Anthony, I said, leaning forward, placing my hands on the counter. It is a hospital discharge summary. Look at the diagnosis line. Read it out loud. He glared at me, annoyed that I was interrupting his breakfast. But something in my eyes, maybe the absolute lack of fear, made him look down. He squinted at the paper. Diagnosis, he mumbled, reading reluctantly. Anaphylaxis, respiratory distress, administration of epinephrine and corticosteroids. He stopped reading. He looked up, his expression shifting from amusement to defensive anger. So, he said, throwing his hands up. So, you had a reaction. We knew that. You used the pen. Why are you showing me this? Do you want a medal? It wasn't drama, Anthony, I said, cutting through his noise. It was a near-fatal anaphylactic shock. Your mother poisoned me. Don't use that word. He spat, pointing a finger at me. That is a disgusting thing to say about my mother. She made a mistake. She's 75 years old. Teresa, she forgets ingredients. She didn't poison you. She didn't forget. I corrected him, my voice rising just enough to fill the room. She laughed. When I couldn't breathe, when I was clutching my throat, she sat there drinking her wine and laughing. She told the table she put shrimp in the stock on purpose to prove I was faking it. She tested me, Anthony. She gambled with my life to win an argument. Anthony rolled his eyes, picking up his coffee cup. You always exaggerate. She was joking. You have no sense of humor. And what about you? I asked. He paused, the cup hovering near his lips. What about me? I asked you to call 911. I said, I was dying. My throat was closing. I had minutes before the rebound effect kicked in. I looked at my husband of 40 years and I begged him for help. And do you know what you did? I waited. I wanted him to say it. He didn't. He just stared at me, his jaw tight. You told me to be quiet because of the neighbors. I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. You were more worried about a siren disturbing the peace than you were about your wife suffocating in the foyer. I drove myself to the ER, Anthony. I passed out in the wheelchair at the entrance. I spent the night hooked up to monitors, wondering if my husband would show up. You didn't. The room went silent. The refrigerator hummed. A bird chirped outside. Anthony set his cup down hard. The coffee sloshed over the rim. Okay, fine, he said, his voice taking on that smooth, manipulative tone he used in boardrooms. I messed up. I didn't think it was that serious. You looked fine. You were walking and talking. How was I supposed to know? I am a nurse. I shouted. It was the first time I had raised my voice. You knew because I told you. But you don't respect me enough to listen to a word I say. So what do you want? He asked, leaning back and crossing his arms. You want an apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't call the ambulance. I'm sorry Mom put shrimp in the soup. Are you happy? Now, can you please take that bag back to the bedroom? This is ridiculous. He thought it was over. He thought he had said the magic words, and I would fall back in line. He thought I was bluffing. I looked at him, and I felt absolutely nothing. The anger had cooled into something solid and unbreakable. I'm not going back to the bedroom. I said, Teresa, stop it, he warned, his eyes narrowing. You're overreacting. You're emotional. You're not thinking clearly. Where are you going to go? You're 68 years old. You haven't worked in years. You need me. I need you. I repeated. I let out a dry, short laugh. Anthony, I have managed this house, your finances, your social calendar, and your ego for 40 years. I raised your children. I nursed your parents when they were sick. I have been the engine keeping this life running while you took the credit. I pay the bills, he shouted, slamming his hand on the counter. I gave you this life. Look around you. You have everything because of me. I have things, I said calmly. I have a big house that feels like a prison. I have a car I'm afraid to scratch. I have jewelry I wear to impress people I don't like, but I don't have a partner. And I definitely don't have a husband. I took a step back, toward my suitcase. I'm done, Anthony, I said. I'm done being the buffer between you and the world. I'm done being the punching bag for your mother. I'm done eating food I have to inspect for poison. You walk out that door, he hissed, standing up now, his face turning red, and you don't come back. Do you hear me? If you leave, I'm cutting you off. You won't see a dime. You'll be crawling back here in a week when reality sets in. He was trying to scare me. He was using the only weapon he had left, money. But he didn't realize that last night I had faced death. Poverty didn't scare me. Living with him scared me. I'm not your nurse anymore, I said, my voice steady and final. I'm not your servant. I'm not your social secretary. And I am certainly not your wife. I grabbed the handle of my suitcase. You can tell the neighbors whatever you want, I said. Tell them I went crazy. Tell them I was difficult. I don't care. Just don't tell them I died. Because for the first time in 40 years, I'm finally going to live. I turned my back on him. Teresa, he screamed. Teresa. I walked out of the kitchen. I walked down the hall. I walked out the front door into the bright, blinding sunshine. And I didn't look back. I reached the front door, my hand hovering over the heavy brass handle. The wood was cool to the touch, solid and unyielding, much like the man I was leaving behind. But before I turned it, I stopped. I didn't turn around, but I could hear Anthony huffing down the hallway behind me. He was following me, not to stop me, but to have the last word. He needed to win the interaction. He needed to make sure that even if I left feeling small. I took a moment to look at the foyer. It was magnificent. The floor was checkered black and white marble, imported from Italy. The chandelier above my head cost more than my parents' first house. To my left was a Ming vase that Anthony had bought at an auction in London. To my right, an oil painting we had acquired in Paris. I had built this, not with money. Anthony wrote the checks, but with my life. I had chosen the marble. I had supervised the contractors. I had dusted that vase. I had turned this cold, sterile museum into a place where people could actually sit down, even if Anthony hated it, when the cushions were dented. Legally, I knew exactly where I stood. California is a community property state. I knew the laws. I was entitled to 50% of everything. Half the house, half the accounts, half the investments. We were worth millions. If I called a lawyer, I could drag Anthony through the court system for years. I could fight for every penny. I could make sure I walked away with enough money to live in luxury for the rest of my life. Go on then. Anthony shouted from the hallway, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. Walk out. See how far you get. I stood there, staring at the door. I thought about the money. I thought about the security. At 68 years old, financial fear is a real, terrifying thing. The cost of living is high. Healthcare is expensive. The idea of starting over with a limited fixed income was enough to make my stomach turn. But then I thought about the cost of that money. I knew Anthony. If I asked for my half, he wouldn't just write a check. He would burn the world down first. He would hide assets. He would delay hearings. He would use his high-priced lawyers to bury me in paperwork. He would drag me into courtrooms and humiliate me. He would make the next 5 years of my life, my remaining years, a living hell. He would use the money as a leash to keep me engaged with him, to keep me fighting, to keep me in his orbit. I didn't have 5 years to waste. I might not even have 5 years left. Last night proved that time is not guaranteed. I realized then that his money wasn't a safety net. It was a trap. As long as I wanted something from him, he owned me. I made a decision in that split second. It was a decision that I knew would make people call me crazy. My friends would scream at me. A lawyer would tell me I was being reckless. But I wasn't looking for a payout. I was looking for a way out. I turned around to face him. Anthony was standing by the entrance to the living room, his face red, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked like a petulant child who had been told no for the first time. "You're bluffing," he sneered. "You can't leave. You don't even have a car of your own. That Mercedes is leased through the company. The credit cards are under my primary account. You have nothing, Teresa. Nothing." He was trying to make me feel helpless. He was listing the ways he controlled me, ticking them off on his fingers like items on a grocery list. I didn't say a word. I simply unzipped my purse. I reached inside and pulled out the key fob to the Mercedes-Benz S-Class sitting in the driveway. It was a beautiful car. Heated seats, smooth ride, the smell of expensive leather. It was the car of a successful woman. I placed the keys on the antique mahogany credenza by the door. The metal clicked against the wood. Anthony's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. I reached into my wallet. I pulled out the Platinum American Express card, the card that had no limit, the card I used to buy his mother's birthday gifts, to book his flights, to buy the groceries for the dinners I cooked. It was the card that gave me access to his world. I placed the card next to the keys. "Teresa, stop being dramatic," Anthony said, his voice wavering slightly. "Pick those up." I wasn't done. I looked at my left hand. The diamond on my ring finger was massive. It was a symbol of his success, not his love. He had upgraded it 10 years ago, not because we were happy, but because his partner bought his wife a bigger one, and Anthony couldn't be outdone. It was heavy. It was cold. And for the last 24 hours, it had felt like a shackle. I grabbed the platinum band. I twisted it. It was tight. My fingers were still slightly swollen from the reaction, but I pulled. I pulled hard. "Don't you dare," Anthony whispered. "That ring cost more than your father made in a decade." I pulled it over my knuckle. It slid off, leaving a pale white indentation on my finger where the skin hadn't seen the sun in 40 years. I placed the ring on top of the credit card. The diamond caught the light from the chandelier, sparkling brilliantly, mocking me with its value. There it was. The Stroud life. The car, the money, the status, all sitting on a table. I looked at Anthony. He looked at the pile of expensive items. And then he looked at me with genuine confusion. He couldn't process it. To him, money was the only thing that mattered. The idea that someone would voluntarily walk away from it broke his brain. "You're insane," he muttered. "You're actually insane. You're going to walk out of here with nothing? You're going to be a pauper, Teresa. You're going to be living in some dump, clipping coupons, waiting for your little nursing pension check. You think that's better than this?" He gestured wildly around the foyer. "You think you're better off without me? You can't survive without me. You have nothing." He was screaming now, desperate to scare me back into submission. He wanted me to look at that ring and feel greed. He wanted me to look at the keys and feel fear. I picked up the handle of my gray suitcase. It was cheap. The wheel was a little wobbly. It contained 3 pairs of pants, a few sweaters, and my toiletries. That was it. That was my net worth right now. But I also had my lungs. I had my breath. I had the knowledge that nobody was going to poison my soup tonight. I looked him dead in the eye. "I'd rather be poor and alive than rich and dead," I said. The words hung in the air. They were simple. They were true. Anthony opened his mouth to argue, to scream, to throw another insult, but he couldn't find the words. He just stared at the ring on the table, realizing that its value had just dropped to zero because it couldn't buy my obedience anymore. I turned my back on him for the final time. I opened the heavy front door. The morning air rushed in, smelling of eucalyptus and freedom. I didn't have a car, so I had called a taxi while I was packing. I could see the yellow cab idling at the bottom of the long, paved driveway, just outside the iron gates. If you walk out that door, I'm changing the locks. Anthony yelled after me, his voice cracking. Don't come crawling back when you realize you made a mistake. I stepped over the threshold. I won't, I said softly, mostly to myself. I pulled the door shut behind me. I didn't slam it. I just closed it firmly. The click of the latch engaging was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I walked down the driveway. The sun was warm on my face. My hospital bracelet was itchy on my wrist. I didn't have the Mercedes. I didn't have the black card. I didn't have the diamond. I had 40 years of lost time to make up for. And as I walked toward that taxi, I checked my pulse out of habit. It was strong. It was steady. It was mine. 3 months have passed since I walked down that driveway and climbed into the back of a yellow taxi. I remember telling the driver to just drive west until we hit the water. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a reservation. I just knew I needed to put as many miles as possible between myself and the woman who had let herself be treated like furniture for 40 years. Now, I live in Santa Monica. My apartment is on the second floor of a building that was built in the 70s. It doesn't have Italian marble floors. The carpet in the hallway is a little worn, and the faucet in the kitchen drips if I don't turn it tightly enough. It is about a quarter of the size of the master bedroom I left behind in Beverly Hills, and I absolutely love it. I love it because it is mine. The rent is paid with my nursing pension. The furniture, a comfortable beige sofa and a sturdy oak table I found at a thrift store, was chosen by me, not an interior designer. When I walk through the door, the only mood I have to worry about is my own. It is Sunday morning. In my old life, Sunday mornings were a frantic countdown to the execution, the dinner at Evelyn's house. I would be stressing about my outfit, checking my blood pressure, and mentally preparing for the insults. Today, Sunday morning means I am standing in my small, sunlit kitchen, slicing fresh vegetables. I am making soup. I chop the carrots. Slice, slice, slice. I chop the celery. I peel the potatoes. I measure out the vegetable stock from a carton that I bought myself. I read the label 3 times in the grocery store, not out of fear, but out of habit. I know exactly what is going into this pot. There are no secrets in my food anymore. There is no poison hiding in the broth. I taste it. It needs salt. I add a pinch. It tastes like freedom. People told me I was crazy to leave the money. My friends from the country club, well, my former friends, stopped calling after the first week. Rumor has it they think I had a nervous breakdown. They think I'm suffering. They imagine me sitting in a dark room, regretting the loss of the Mercedes and the black card. They don't understand that poverty isn't about the number in your bank account. Poverty is living in a mansion where you aren't allowed to speak. Poverty is sleeping next to a man who would let you suffocate to avoid embarrassing his mother. By that definition, I was the poorest woman in Beverly Hills. Now I feel rich. I take my bowl of soup out to the small balcony. It overlooks an alley, but if I crane my neck just right, I can see a sliver of the Pacific Ocean. I can smell the salt in the air. I hear laughter from the street below. It's a group of women walking to the beach. I smile. I joined a gardening club last month. It sounds cliché, I know, the retired woman planting petunias, but it grounded me. I met a woman named Sarah there. She's a retired schoolteacher, a widow. She doesn't care about galas. She doesn't care about my husband's stock portfolio. We drink iced tea and talk about soil pH and our grandkids. I also reconnected with two of the nurses I used to work with in the ER back in the 80s. We met for lunch last week. They didn't look at me with pity. They looked at me with respect. One of them, Brenda, slammed her hand on the table when I told her about the EpiPen and said, "Girl, you should have stabbed him with it, too." We laughed until we cried. It felt good to laugh. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I genuinely laughed, not a polite social titter, but a real belly-shaking laugh. I finished my soup and walked back inside to rinse the bowl. That's when I saw the mail on the counter. I had picked it up yesterday, but hadn't opened it yet. Sitting on top of the pile was a thick, creamy envelope with a familiar logo embossed in the corner. It was from Anthony's law firm. My heart did a little stutter, a phantom reflex of the old anxiety. But I took a deep breath. Inhale. Exhale. I wasn't his victim anymore. I picked up the letter opener. I sliced the envelope open. It wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't a divorce decree. It was a letter from Anthony. Not his lawyer, but him. I scanned the typed pages. It was pathetic, really. He started by saying how difficult things had been since I left. He complained that the housekeeper didn't know how to starch his collars correctly. He mentioned that his mother was disappointed that I hadn't come to my senses yet. And then the offer. He wrote that if I came home, he would forget the incident. He promised to buy me a new car, a better one. He said we could go on a cruise to Europe. He said he was willing to increase my allowance. He was trying to buy me back. He thought I was a defective appliance that just needed a more expensive warranty to start working again. He didn't say he loved me. He didn't say he was sorry for almost letting me die. He just said he wanted his life back to normal. He missed his servant. He didn't miss his wife. I looked at the letter. 3 months ago, this would have crushed me. Today, it just felt pathetic. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel the need to call him and scream. I just felt done. The opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And looking at his signature at the bottom of the page, I realized I simply didn't care what happened to him anymore. I walked over to the trash can under the sink. I didn't shred the letter. I didn't burn it. That would be too dramatic. I just dropped it in right on top of the potato peelings and the coffee grounds. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel. That part of my life was over. The trash would be collected on Tuesday. I grabbed my sweater and headed for the door. Sarah and the gardening club were meeting at the community plot in 20 minutes, and I wanted to stop and buy some donuts for the group on the way. I walked out of my apartment building and into the sunshine. The air was cool and crisp. I checked my wristwatch. A simple plastic one I bought at the drugstore because I left my Cartier watch on the dresser back in Beverly Hills. It kept perfect time. It took me 68 years to realize that my life belonged to me. It took a bowl of poisoned soup and a husband who looked the other way to finally wake me up. I lost 40 years trying to please people who would never be pleased. I can't get those years back, but I have today. I have tomorrow. And I have this soup which I made with my own hands in a kitchen where I am safe. Please listen to me. Don't wait until you are 68. Don't wait until you are in the emergency room. If the soup tastes wrong, spit it out. Don't swallow it to be polite. If the house feels cold, even when the heat is on, walk out the door. And if the marriage makes you feel small, leave it behind. You can survive without the big house. You can survive without the diamond ring. But you cannot survive without your self-respect. I am Teresa Stroud. I am a retired nurse. I am a survivor. And for the first time in my life, I am free. What city are you listening from? And what time is it there? write it in the comments. And if you'd like to help me keep sharing these emotional, thrilling stories every day, even a small donation makes a big difference. It truly helps keep the channel alive. For more life stories like this, you can explore the other videos on my channel and subscribe. On the screen, you'll see 2 new stories I'm sure you'll enjoy. Click one and start listening right away. With love.